Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes, a vibrant rural hub that supports making, telling and sharing stories in all art forms.
Welcome everyone to our second Booktown on Sunday for 2024. We're very excited to have Mark. This is his book, as mentioned, great title, and there's a great quote here from crime writer Jack Heath, which says, "This is the best arc I've read in years, and you can put that in the cover if you want to." Interesting. And I think I've mentioned this to Mark. I know it's a colourful cover. It's not a cosy, okay? This is not Richard Osman. This is full on, and it's a great read. So welcome. So Mark, Angela gave you a bit of an intro, but could you tell us about yourself and about your writing journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. First off, this is my first in-person event, so this is...
We'll be gentle.
Fun. Yes, appreciated. So I kind of I started writing, when I was young. I think my first novel was a 6-page tome about a giant in year one or something like that. Pictures as well, just to sort of make sure the prose would stand up. And then kind of I ended up doing a degree in professional writing at the University of Canberra, which was wonderful. And I was very lucky to be in a class with a bunch of people who went on to be published.
Can you name drop?
I can a little bit if you would like. Brooke Davis, who wrote Lost and Found, a big book, and Jeremy Lachlan, who works in writes young adult, or middle grade, fiction. And from there, I kind of moved towards screenwriting was what I was most interested in, and so kind of went very hard at that. And had a few almosts. I got a couple of options. I got a Screen Australia development grant. Never quite got there though. And then there was one of my stories that was just never going to get made as a screenplay. It was this massive sci-fi fantasy sort of thing. And I thought, I love this story, but I don't want it to just be a sample so that I can prove I can write a Marvel movie or something like that. So I turned it into a young adult middle grade thing. Again, almost there. Almost.
What kept you going? All those near misses, what was it that kept you going?
I think I had just enough nice feedback. I'd get to second round edits with an editor, or I got shortlisted for the Text Prize, or an agent would say, "Oh, it's not there, but the writing is good quality." Really and then it was that on a few manuscripts, and then eventually I got to this idea. It's one that I'd written. I'd started as a screenplay 20 years ago, and then just had this thought of it was a bit deep and dark, and I didn't feel smart enough for it at the time. It was a hitman, and it was very moody and philosophical and religious because I was just out of uni and might as well have been wearing a beret or something. But it eventually, I just put it to the side. And then when my son was sort of about to be born, I just had a bit of a feeling of if not now, when? And so I just started writing it. But by that stage, I was like, who cares about the hitman and the tortured masculinity? Let's make it fun.
Because you changed gender, because the hit person is a hit woman. But we'll get into that.
Absolutely.
I want to keep that for later, because it was interesting that you picked a female to drive the action. I just want to go back to your screenwriting, because this is very visual, and you also have a really good ear for dialogue. So the fact you've done script writing or screenwriting doesn't surprise me.
Thanks.
So what was the transition like from pages of dialogue and a few actions to fleshing it out into a book?
Short answer would be pretty clunky, I think, to begin with. It was a lot of stilted phrasing probably and stuff like that. I did think, one thing that I maybe picked up more quickly was the dialogue kind of aspect.
Oh, yeah, you're very good at the dialogue.
Oh, thank you. So it did feel like learning everything all over again. And it's also, screenwriting is very structure-based. It's very focused on that, which is really helpful for writing like genre fiction. But you can kind of end up putting your characters in a chicken run a little bit. Like you're not letting them kind of run the story. You're saying like, this is where you need to be.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a bit.
Does it make plotting a lot easier, do you think?
It does. I've almost, because I worked so hard for so many years, it had to be structure had to be perfect. I kind of try and forget that as much as possible. So I think of a few tentpole moments, and then as much as possible, my trick is actually to get the character. I imagine being at the pub with them, being at a cafe or something, and they're telling me about this intense experience that happened to them. Mm-hmm. And so I immediately get like this feeling of what's important to them. I get a bit of dialogue, but I also notice what's not important. So that,
the stuff they haven't told you about.
Yeah. And also they'll yada the plot. They're sort of like, and then I went here and blah, blah, blah. And then I do that for every single character in every single scene. Yeah. And it ends up with these like arguments and everyone saying like, no, this is how it happened, buddy. And then try and take the best version.
Your head must be really full of stuff.
A little. Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to do with the conversation is to take apart the title of the book. So we start with the Hitwoman. So our main character is Olivia, who was an ex-Hitwoman. She formerly worked for a crime syndicate in Spain, but she fled, escaped, and she's now living, where is she? Dandenong. In the Dandenongs with her husband and her children. And it seems to me that there are far more contract killers in popular culture, in movies and films and books than there are in real life. So if you took Bullet Train or John Wick's universe, like it's full of contract killers, and that's not the way it works, is it?
No.
And the contract killers you do see who get caught aren't particularly slick and professional.
Yes.
So what is the enduring attraction of that world of the contract killer, and what was it that drew you to it?
Yeah, I think because it's a big genre, it's a classic genre. Yeah. It's big in books, but it's especially big in film and TV, as you mentioned. Yeah. And I think you're right. Like it's not the way that actual
God, I'm
world
worried
works.
It's not the way it works.
There's a movie Richard Linklater just came out with called Hitman.
Oh yeah,
you saw that? Yeah, and it's basically this thing that you hear the story of the in America Craigslist or something like that, where they just find some dodgy person, pay them $5,000 to kill some. Apparently that doesn't exist, and almost all of those are actual stings by the police. And so it's a true story about a guy who was just pretending to be a hitman and would just catch these people wanting to murder relatives half the time. But I think because crime in general, there's an idea of the thin veil of polite society almost. And it's the same thing I think with political thrillers. There's a conspiracy, just if we just peel back the layers, or even like disaster movies. It's like how quickly would we all turn on each other? And so that's the crime thing in general. But I think because we wonder what our neighbours would do, what we'd do in that situation.
Yeah.
I think with the hit person, contract killer idea, there's an added little thing of like, we've all maybe got a price tag on our head. And how much would we cost?
Wow. Can't say
it was just something that I thought, like, because it's the ultimate capitalism.
Yeah, it is. So you've lived with this idea though for what, 20 years? 20 years?
Yeah.
When you decided to come back to it and you've changed gender, it's still philosophical and there's a thread of religion through it. So when you came back to it, why did you make decisions? What sort of decisions did you make to turn it into a book and to bring it to this? And why did you change Olivia from being a moody 20-year-old dude to an older woman?
Yeah. He was always like a middle-aged man, but he was just a really poorly written middle-aged man. I think a lot of it was just purely I wouldn't want to read that book.
Yeah.
Like, I was basing it off this idea of I'd have to the reason I couldn't write it the first time was I started thinking like, I need to read Sartre and like every, Kierkegaard and all these like really high times, and I'd be lucky to get past page 1. So I that's why I thought leave it until you're older. And then by the time I got a few years and was probably a little bit more comfortable in myself, realizing that those books aren't interesting, full stop for me.
Yeah.
And
that's life, isn't it? That's maturing, yeah.
And I found, like you say, like all the stuff that I wanted to ingest into it, came through anyway, like the gender politics, the philosophy and stuff like that. But I didn't want to do something that felt like broccoli to the readers, like I wanted to do something that was fun and quirky and would carry people through. And as soon as I sort of thought of Olivia and the way she was, which was a little bit bitter, a little bit kind of pretty contemptuous of things, but mostly self-contemptuous and but also had like a pretty dark sense of humor. Like it really flowed. And I wrote like a stack of it actually bouncing on a fitball, like with my son strapped to my chest to try and keep him asleep.
Well, let's stay with Olivia.
Yep.
She's not that popular cultural stereotype of that hard-hearted killer who doesn't feel, who just goes about their business. She feels deeply what she's done and she's impacted by it. She also has her weaknesses. She's not Lara Croft. She doesn't kick 20 guys aside and only have a cut there. So talk us through that creation of Olivia and what you wanted to say with her or what you wanted to do with her.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So a big part of it was that groundedness around characters in general. So I'm a big fan of the movie Unforgiven, the Clint Eastwood movie, because that took sort of the romance of the Western genre, and we'd always, growing up as a kid on the TV was always the double feature of like the Westerns, and it's all about the quick draw and, the noble sheriff and who's cleaning up the lawless town and everything. And what Unforgiven did is it said, like, it's not how quick you are, it's whether you're cold-blooded enough or possibly drunk enough to just stand there while the bullets are firing and shoot someone. And that, that noble sheriff is actually probably just a fascist who kind of just wants to run things his own way.
Yeah.
And I liked the idea of transporting that onto the hit person genre, because, like you say, like the hit women in general, there's not many of them compared to the number of hit men in popular culture. And when they do exist, they tend to be these like supermodels in a catsuit, exactly. Sniper rifle from like 1,000 yards away. And there's not much character development.
No.
So I wanted to put a person I thought I might meet in the real world and think about what would make you actually go into an existence like that. Because there are people, as much as our Hollywood idea of a hit person doesn't exist, the cartels and syndicates, they have people like this, but their entire job is much more likely to be, are you willing to be the person who just goes and murders someone for money? It's not like whether you've been trained by this secret cabal.
No. It's are you heartless or hard enough to do it? Yeah. And when we meet Olivia, she wants to know why she's killing someone. She wants to know that it's actually worth her doing it.
Yes.
So she's at that crisis point.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it was that idea of like, what would that genuinely do? And it's obviously a combination of me putting myself in those shoes, but also like women who I know, what would that extra element be? Because it's an incredibly, like, this world of, because she's kind of operating in those two criminal worlds. Like there's the high level, super rich syndicate in Spain, but most of the action that we see is more that kind of almost poverty-based crime. And both of those are very hyper-masculine and kind of rough and tumble. And what would it mean to be a woman in that situation? And within, like, I tried to create a spectrum as well of her. Her husband is obviously more the progressive sort of side of masculinity, and then you've got like these kind of, like I say, hyper masculine, hyper violent, and I didn't want to make her a rough and tumble SAS kind of muscle bound.
And she's far more interesting to read. Yeah. So you're talking about the drug cartel, and I understand you did a lot of research around it. So what did you learn? What did you understand about the world that Olivia was operating in?
Yeah, it's big, obviously. Like
Huge, isn't it?
I was trying, because most of that stuff takes place overseas. It was mostly looking at the Central American cartels and the European crime syndicates like the mafias and stuff like that. I did look a lot into the general, the real world stuff, and a lot of that is very depressing and dark because of how mundane it is, like just how easily people die and how unnecessary those deaths seem from the outside.
Yeah.
And that, like, it is also just a massive chain of, you start with poor people with not much choice getting into a pretty dark situation. And especially when you're talking about drugs, like, you end up at some very rich kind of privileged people who never have to see the blood that kind of led to that situation.
They make the money, but that's it.
Yeah.
They don't touch the dirty part.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
To tell you the truth, though, a lot of what's in there is just decades and decades of being a massive crime film. So there's Scorsese. And,
so it's been research almost.
Yeah. Michael Mann, like all those like just wonderful films on TV. Yeah.
So do you see Olivia as an anti-hero?
Yeah.
Is that how we're supposed to read it?
That's a really good question. I remember I showed an early draft of this to a friend, and like, he said to me, and you really want Olivia to win because you can tell, like, deep down she's a good person. And I was sort of sitting there, I was like, is she a good person? like I don't know if that's true. And
She certainly tests your loyalty reading it.
Yeah. Well, that was what I was really interested in as well, because I think the domain of the anti-hero of the last sort of maybe 20 years has been in TV. So, The Sopranos really
Breaking Bad.
And one of the things I loved the most that The Sopranos did, maybe the best, I think, is that he was a kind of jovial, happy man who, was about his family and everything like that. And they'd really build that stuff in. And every time he started to like Tony a little bit more, suddenly they'd make him do something absolutely horrific.
It reminds you.
Yes. Yeah. And either something super violent or just narcissistic or super mean. And I loved what that did to me. And so I kind of wanted to do that a little bit to the reader. Like, I love those books that I read where it's almost dependent on what the reader brings to it changes the story. And so I'd constantly mess around with people of, like, as she's taking her revenge, because she goes on this kind of revenge journey, I wanted to maybe have some people cheering for some of them, because some of them are just horrible people. And then a couple of others where you go like, ooh,
did you really have to do that? Yeah. Oh, you do.
Yeah. And whose head are we in? Like,
exactly.
Is this a person we want to be in the head space of?
That's always that great argument around, does the lead character have to be likable?
Yes. Yeah.
And, people say, I didn't finish this book. I didn't like the lead person.
Yeah.
So what if you didn't like them? Were they interesting? Yes. And did you want to read the book?
Yeah. And I think so much of that comes down to clear motivation as well. Like, if I really wanted at any stage, like, you knew what she was trying to do something, for starters. There was something very clear that she wanted, and you understood why she wanted it, and she was actively pursuing it, so that even if you didn't maybe like what she was doing, you understood it. It was interesting, and you could question whether you'd have the same reaction. But I also think you can get away with a lot if you make someone funny. So I try to do that as well.
Humour excuses everything. So we'll get to the reducing household debt part of this title, which essentially is about karma and karmic debt. So Olivia's trying to reconcile her past actions with her current life, and she's trying to find peace in there suddenly. And we do have one of her ex-colleagues arrive who's decided he's found Buddhism as a way of dealing with things. So what do you think of the idea of karma? And do you think people can ever escape their wrongdoings?
Thanks for that question. So my wife is Buddhist, so I got a lot of those Buddhist phrases in there. And I think the general pop culture idea of karma is what I had maybe and what Olivia kind of represents of it's almost like, I do this, so therefore this happens in return. And that's not really the concept. And I'm not smart enough to have understood that concept and reflect it properly. But I think it's much deeper and more complex than that. As far as her sort of or getting through the things she's done, at the end of the day, like 90% of what's happening to us when we've done those things, like for a person like her who's escaped legal ramifications, like it's literally just what's in her head.
Yeah.
And so maybe we don't want people to escape from that, because like you either learn from that stuff and theoretically do better next time from your misdeeds, or you start to develop a pattern and people notice it and get scared.
She's a bit her punishment is in her head. Like she's punishing herself, really.
Yeah,
and it's that
self-flagellation.
lifetime of all those awful things I've done.
Yeah. And like it's all that existential stuff that I kind of wanted to dig into and question and ask and stuff like that. I'm not sure I have a concrete answer for it. Like I have opinions on it and stuff like that, but I also think fiction's much better at asking like elegant questions than giving like clear answers.
I don't think you need to have an answer. You can be an exploration.
Yeah.
So where does the religion sit in with this for you, with the question of karma?
Yeah. So I think religion's like been a big part of our family. I consider myself sort of agnostic, atheist, depending on the day of the week, really. But it just sort of like switches around.
It's a theme for Olivia.
Yes.
She's lapsed.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think my interest in all of that, like, because I'm fascinated by it as well. My interest in all of that is that all of these characters are looking for meaning and reconciliation, like you said, of sort of they're trying to understand what they did, basically on a existential and molecular level. You know, like what did murdering these people do to my soul, quote unquote?
Yeah.
And like, oh, here's this book or this, you know, thing, this practice that's got 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years that might explain that. And it's something that I can grab onto. And they're both lying to themselves. You know, like Takunda, the colleague you're talking about, is constantly spouting stuff about Buddhism while acting very anti-Buddhist. Olivia keeps on telling him and other people that she's basically not at peace, but she understands and it's fine and it'll do.
And she's not.
She's not at all. It keeps bubbling up. Because
people say that just because I hope it'll eventually happen. They will find peace. If I keep saying enough, I'll eventually find peace. It'll come for me. So I'm not going to plot spoil, but something bad happens to Olivia and her family in this book, and it's the big turning point. She wants revenge, but she doesn't want karma splashing back at her while she seeks revenge for what's happened. So how she goes about it is an interesting take on things, and it's on the back. She would like people to die, but she doesn't want to do it herself. She wants it to happen indirectly. Yes. So how did you hit upon this?
Yeah, so
that's a really interesting way of doing it.
So she kind of manipulates the men using their own bad personality traits of their anger, ego, and greed, and that was a big part of the change from the initial screenplay, because in the initial screenplay, it was just all about this, like I said, this tortured, brooding person. And so he just lurked outside windows and kind of followed them around. And I was like, oh, that's very anticlimactic and uninteresting. But I thought, how could that guilt and that stuff be strong enough so you really felt it there, but she could still be an active character and be doing something fun. Yeah. And what was interesting to me, like what would be like setting myself a bit of a challenge, I suppose, of like, because it let me have all these like funny little rants and stuff like that about existential questions, while at the same time, karma has become, instead of just this nebulous thing that she kind of thinks is there, it's actually a concrete thing she has to factor in. And that was just a fun and interesting thing, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, definitely. So you've talked about, I've said this is very visual, and the dialogue is very, very good. Can you see this become a screenplay? Could you take it back to where it started?
I actually have. So I'm not allowed to give details, but I was actually lucky enough in February, March, that there was a tiny international bidding war for the screen rights. So someone did buy it. So we're waiting to see how all that goes.
So you're going to say, can I write the screenplay?
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. At the moment, they're not the sort of people who maybe need firsthand.
Dang glad. You sure?
Yeah.
I think a lot of writers say, no, best you just sell the rights and back out of it, stay away. Now, Olivia, when we meet her, is married to Jay, who comes across as this ultimate romantic partner. He's very supportive, does a lot of the care, but when comes to shove, he shows his true colours. And I know that you've been a stay-at-home dad, and part of Jay's experience reflects your own experiences. But I can also see that he's an opportunity to play around with roles and expectations in relationships. So what were you doing with Jay, or how do you see him?
So there's a few things I was trying to do, I suppose, like in general, the book dealing with gender roles is kind of interesting to me. And like I said, that spectrum of masculinity and sexism and misogyny and stuff, you have that blatant stuff, and then you have maybe some stuff that's more kind of simple and that creating like an idea for comedy, but also the horrible consequences, like seeing that as a spectrum itself as well. I did just like the idea of Olivia having a sparring partner who had a similar sense of humour, and they could because I think that's what a lot of great relationships are built on. You know, my wife and I joke with each other, and we have a sense of humour that others maybe wouldn't get in the same way, and we have our special jokes. On another level as well, so I at the beginning when my son was born, we were sort of 50-50 stay at home and then versus our paid work, and then I ended up sort of working full time. But as I was explaining that, like telling friends about it, I did just notice a slight change in myself depending on their gender as to how I explained it.
Oh, that's interesting.
I just felt as if I was telling a man, there would be a slight impulse to maybe puff the chest, like I'm still a man too sort of thing. And if they weren't male, that idea of maybe wanting my pat on the head for like being a genuine progressive male. And I did also notice that the reaction to people was different, because like I did get the, oh yeah, that sounds good, like from the male, and I did get my pats on the head for most of the time, and I thought like that idea is ridiculous and incredibly problematic and is hilarious in the get-go, but leads to incredibly damaging sort of concepts that mostly harm women. And I wanted to reflect that within the story of like, this is funny and, make some jokes at my own expense. But then as the story continues, we sort of see where those consequences can lead. That was just interesting to me.
But I did feel for Jay, because imagine finding out that your wife once was a contract killer.
Yeah.
That's a big reveal. Yeah. So Olivia, in this book, in the hunt for her revenge, she goes back to the country town she grew up in called Railton. You grew up in a country town. Were you exorcising anything through the portrayal of Railton? Or
I think because I grew up in Yass in New South Wales, and there is a lot of Yass in Railton, and I went through kind of the circular thing that I think a lot of country town kids do go through. So I loved it as a kid. We played sport all the time. I rode my bike everywhere. I knew everyone. And then just when I was maybe starting to feel a little bit kind of stifled, when I was around 14, we moved to Canberra in a bigger place. And then as I got older, I was like, really grateful that I escaped and, how horrible it would have been. And then got to progressively busier places, right in the center of Melbourne. And then like, as I get older, I slowly, I moved out to what is effectively a pseudo country town in the hills. And then since in the last year, we've moved to an actual country town in Warburton. So I think it is that thing of you come back.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
I also, this, I'm not sure I explored it or articulated it enough for it to be clear in the book, but just as a thing that helped me for Olivia's psychology, she has this thing in her that she thinks is like she thinks she's broken, and this idea of killing and stuff like that is something that, as much as it's based on things that she did, she thinks she was broken before that.
Yeah.
And she thinks she was broken from childhood, not through a specific traumatic event that's mentioned, but just the way she was made. And a country town is where she came from. So a little bit she kind of maybe blames that foundation. Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned a lot of movies and books. What are your influences? Who visually or on the written page, who inspires you? Or
I love so the No Country for Old Men as both a book and movie is incredibly influential on me. It's one of those rare things where I love both equally. I also love Scorsese, Michael Mann, David Chase, Denis Villeneuve. Luc Besson is a big one for sort of the female, the Hitwoman, although he started with this.
Did you The Professional?
Yes. And before that, he did La Femme Nikita.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, which is a beautiful, beautiful film about a really like kind of interesting character. And then basically in the late, that was in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, he suddenly started doing those like supermodel women in the catsuit kind of thing. And that was all he did. So he kind of strayed away from that, which was a bit unfortunate, but I could genuinely list a lot. I
asked for a reason because I could tell it influences you.
Yeah.
What about writing? Is like any crime writers you really admire?
I love Dennis Lehane. Gillian
I love
Flynn,
Dennis Lehane,
Tana French, and S.A. Cosby. There's actually a big part of the makeup of it. If anyone's ever seen the movie Gone Baby Gone or read the book.
Yep.
So the book does this, but I actually think the movie distilled it much better with Ben Affleck and Aaron Stockard wrote the screenplay. But there's an act that's done that is illegal, but would probably be considered to be moral. And as an audience, we're probably in line with the morality of it, and we think, that probably should have been done. But that's sort of a common thing within crime fiction. But what they do so beautifully in that movie is that because you are more likely to go with the immoral thing, they've set it up as almost this like ladder of immorality within the characters.
How far?
Yeah. So there's would you be the person who lied to protect this immoral thing? Would you be the one who killed to do it? Would you be the one who set up the conspiracy? Would you be the one who covered it all up? Like, and you could just decide like, okay, well, how far would I go?
Exactly. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So, Olivia, is this her one and only appearance or?
For now, I think. I think.
So what's next? There's something happening?
Yeah. So I had the very lucky thing. Describing this book purely by plot, it sounds really dark and intense. And there is obviously darkness and intensity, but it is quite comedic. And I think that's maybe part of why it took a while for people to even read it and understand what I was going for. I was pitching it quite badly. Anyway, the upshot is that I wrote a whole other book basically in the time I was trying to pitch this, and a firm has picked that up as well.
That's good.
It's about a mother and child on the run from powerful people sort of fleeing up the east coast of Australia, and it's all written from the perspective of a 6-year-old boy.
I love a good road trip. Now I'm going to open up to the audience. Are there any questions I haven't asked?
So the thing that they do, and that also Phoebe Waller-Bridge does in the first season of Killing Eve, like that. Yeah. So they were really big inspiration points for the way they managed to twist between like comedy, tragedy, violence, and it's almost on a dime. And the Coens are like just remarkable. I think like I struggle a little bit to kind of understand how they do what they do sometimes, because it feels like it shouldn't work. And sometimes when you watch the first time, you're sort of like, I guess it's good. I'm not quite sure. And then you watch it again and you're like, this is a masterpiece. I did hear with Phoebe Waller-Bridge what she did, because she got her break in theatre. their group used to have someone sit up the back of every performance, and they'd literally just be watching the audience and waiting for when they pushed them too far. And when they like noticed sort of like body language that said, that's a bit too much tragedy, we should go to comedy earlier. Or like, and they really refine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I found that remarkable, right? Like, yeah. So that's what I was trying to think about and invoke. Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you.
So you're obviously a lover of film. Will you go back to screenwriting? Is there still that unresolved, unmet desire to write the film?
Absolutely. I really enjoy that. At the moment, I'm probably having too much fun with the full fiction because it does let you there's a lot of stuff. I really like first-person narrative, and I really like getting people's heads and having these quirky voices, like the 6-year-old boy, like the kind of ranting Hitwoman. And that's a bit harder to do in film because no one likes just this wall and voiceover.
The internal monologue's got to be sparing.
Yes, yeah.
It'll work well. Yeah.
I think the craft takes a long time to learn. And one of the biggest parts of it, most people will need age to get to, which is that like lack of pandering or wanting to kind of like do what other people want you to do. I think this is maybe my own personal belief, but I think the more natural privilege you have in life, the longer it takes you. I notice. I think if you've lived a life where you've kind of not been listened to, it's a little bit. Maybe you're younger when you can develop those skills because you know you don't have time to fluff around. And
that's really interesting.
Kind of like that's a complete guesswork, but I just noticed like when you see some creators, they seem to arrive much more fully formed. And demographically, people like me have been allowed to do their divorce novel or like their kind of
angsty 20-year-old novel,
the college campus novel, but maybe it was like a gimme kind of idea. Just as an insider thing, just to link with something that was going to come later, I do know for a fact that Anna Johnston, your one from next month.
Oh, that picture, next picture. When you scroll, Nick.
That was her first manuscript, and it's done very well. And it's rude, I think. Like she needs to stop. But no, I do agree. I think it takes if you really care about the craft, you have to work at it. I think it's rare to have like a pure voice, and if they have, they probably started at 5 or 10 or something like that.
In the crime world, there are 2 camps and maybe 3 camps. There's plotters and there's pantsers. So the plotters will work out what they're going to do and go for it, and the pantsers will just say, I've got a great idea, and just write. I think reality, most people just sort of move. But how would you class yourself?
Yeah, I think like that screenwriting background has made me a plotter, but I actively fight against that in order to be a bit more organic. So like I say, I kind of get my characters to talk to me at a pub, get them all to fight with each other. But there is like a really good trick that I learned from screenwriting. It comes from Aristotle's Poetics. That sounds really highfalutin, but most screenwriters will read that. And it's actually articulated really well by Aaron Sorkin, which is you basically ask 3 questions of every single character. What do they want? What's standing in their way? And what are they willing to do to get past it? And it's just really simple and clear-sighted.
Yep.
And you find that 90% of the time, what's standing in their way is another character. And so everyone has to level up. For starters, it means everyone's got a perspective. Even cop number 5, the waiter, they're there for a reason and they're trying to do something. But it also means like, I'm sure we can all remember novels we've seen in genre fiction often where like the main character is amazing, but they're kind of just barging through everyone else. And it is literally because those characters are there to serve a function for the protagonist.
Yeah.
If you give your antagonist, if you give just your secondary character something that they want and they fight, your protagonist has to level up, and maybe they don't win. Maybe like this secondary character who's just gone along for the ride is like sick of this, and just throws it down and says, no, we're doing my way. And suddenly the story has a few more surprises. And I think the actual reader can sense that it's not a foregone conclusion.
That the character A will get to.
And things can twist and suddenly someone shows up and I have found that characters aren't tough enough or aren't smart enough, and that they're getting walked over too much. And so I've had to go back and think like, well, why? And can you have a passive character? Like, I don't want to talk about the book too much, obviously, but the next one, because it's a 6-year-old, like he has almost no agency. Like he's constantly being brought along, and he also doesn't understand what's happening. So making that character active, that was a nightmare.
You weren't tempted to make them 16? I took my son to see Andy Griffiths years ago when Andy was writing those Just books of his character Andy, and he said, I just put Andy in a really bad situation. I think, how bad can I make it? And just what else can I do to him? And he just piles it on, which is exactly that, just piles on the pressure to see what Andy will do next.
Yeah, well Kurt Vonnegut, I think, said, he's passed away unfortunately, was you put your characters up in a tree and throw rocks at them. Like, and even though you love them, you have to do this because then you'll see what they're made of. We're still working out time frames. They don't like to work too much, like while we're focusing on this one, but it's reasonably complete. They're thinking maybe the same time next year, but it could be earlier, could be later, depending on they look for publishing window. You would know better than me about what's like a good kind of time frame to link it with. But
so they were lucky because you started the second book thinking, this first one isn't going to quite.
Because I was happy with it. I thought like it was what I set out to do at least. And I'd given it to a bunch of my friends and their feedback had been almost nothing. And I was like, still not getting any kind of bites. And I was like, well, I clearly have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to So
when you were pitching it and you said you weren't pitching very well, I'm curious.
Yeah.
What was that 5-second pitch for this book?
I think it was completely, it was literally removal of tone. So it's talking about that plot. It's talking about that revenge thing. And it just sounds like a really heavy book about guilt and violence, guilt and violence, which it is. But
plenty of that.
But it's also I wanted to look at the absurdity of those things and things like forgiveness and stuff like that that we talk about in a really surface level in our culture. We don't always like kind of go into it, and same with death and our complicity in those ideas. Like I think we sometimes give them face value.
Don't want to think about that.
Yeah. And I'm the same. Like, don't get me wrong, but it was wonderful to have a character who isn't like that.
So have you given yourself a bit of space now? Because book number 2 is basically done.
Yes.
So the pressure's not on.
I don't. I need to write. Like the other thing of having spent 20 years and I think probably 500 odd rejections is my conservative estimate. Like writing is absolutely a meditative part of me as well. Like I need it. I used to need it as a way to decompress from everything else that was going on. And, I'm sure my wife could tell you about me being like kind of maybe a bit antsy or like stressed or anxious and needing to go away and write. So I don't know how to be quiet without it at the moment. And I also maybe want to use that a little bit. I'm working on the third.
Good idea. So what is it like living with someone who has arguments with people in his head?
So that was a happy accident. Like I am so lucky with Affirm with this cover, and I think the title has been a big part of the interest around the book. So I had a couple of different titles. There was one, Scratches in Lead, was my original, which is sort of talks about a metaphor that's in there, and I thought was a cool hard-boiled kind of title. And then it changed to Sinners Like Me, which was a line.
I don't mind that one.
It was a line from in there, and then I got like a kind of tentative email from the publisher at one stage who's sort of like, we're getting some cover options, all a little bit BDSM-y. So like, I thought she's like, and I'm not sure that it's reflecting, like I say, the tone, the comedic kind of aspect to it, and the dark comedy that's in there.
Yeah.
So I just thought, and obviously it's a play on kind of like financial guides or that sort of thing, but also that sense of greater debt and existential kind of owing, but also like, because at the end of the day it's a book about a marriage as well, like what the two of them owe each other and what maybe we owe the broader society. That's probably getting a little high-minded, but
yeah, it's right. Yeah, and it seems to be a bit of a theme, Angela. This sort of so-and-so's guide to, or the list. Yeah, bit of a theme in
It is that because publishing has such long lead times. Like you know, I we had that coming out, and then it is, you know, as soon as you buy a blue car, you see blue cars everywhere. Like I'm suddenly seeing like the guide too, and
it seems to be a bit of a theme. It's great. Yeah, because Mark has got his official launch at Readings in Carlton on the 12th of September. So you have to book through Readings, I would imagine, going to the. And then if you're up Hillsville way, he's got an event at Verso Books in Hillsville on the 19th.
Yep.
So good luck with that.
Thank you.
Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativeclunes.org.au.